Thank you so much. It's great to be here. I hope that that is the first and last time you hear the word reckoning today. I think we may be over-reckoninged, and I don't plan to talk about that today, but it's really a pleasure to be here. I want to thank Colette and Alec and Maggie and learners for having me here. It's really an honor to open this amazing day of speakers. And I figure either I'll leave you energized or I'll set the bar so freaking low that everyone else will just look amazing. So my name is Judd. I am a consultant and a writer and a leadership and executive coach. I also teach leadership and social psychology at UC Berkeley. But for a long time, let's see, I got to operate technology. So this is my talk. That's what we're doing. So for a long time, I worked in industry. That's why I'm here. I spent a long time in UX and UXR. And I've seen the practice from many angles. I worked at Yahoo, at Facebook, and then I had a bunch of different jobs at Airbnb, which allowed me to see the power of insights, the power of UXR from so many different angles. So I left Airbnb in 2022. Since then, I've been a consultant and a writer, and I've just had so many wonderful conversations with many of you in this room, with other people in the industry. And through it all, I've kind of had this ringside seat, the same seat or a similar seat that I think many of you have had. It leads me to this core argument I'm making, which is, this is a crucial moment for us as a field. The winds may be changing in a way which can lead us to evolve our industry and our practice. And it makes some very specific suggestions about things we should do. So if we believe this true, and maybe you don't, but if you believe it's true, this is probably not the time to sit back on the same research playbook that we had for 15 years. It's probably a time to think about what we can learn and apply it to the next 15. There are a small number of books that I regularly reference so that people think I'm smart. And this is one of them, The Structure of Scientific Revolutions by Thomas Kuhn. It's one of the most famous books in the history of science. Don't worry, you don't have to read it. I'm going to tell you what it says. The main thing it says is that paradigm shifts usually happen suddenly, not gradually. We think that the way that scientific ideas tend to change is evolutionarily over a time. But in fact, if you look at how ideas and practices really change, it tends to be all at once. Usually when the big structures and the older generation retire and die. Now, I don't see anybody dying, thankfully, around here, but I would say that this is an evolution. So maybe the word evolution is wrong. Maybe it's actually revolution that we should be talking about. It's a thing I think we've been building up to for a while. But all at once, there seems to be this shift happening in the field. And I think it's a good thing. You know, I think the future is really bright for research. It isn't just a matter of us working harder or sucking up to the right people. I think a lot of people have felt a lot of hardship and blame associated with the hard times that research has gone through. Why isn't what UXR is enough already? It's like a good question. It is worth so much, but I think the main thing is we just have to take responsibility. You know, if we want to move forward and do things better, let's be critical about ourselves as a field. Let's be active change agents for what's ahead. Depending on how you look at it, you could see them as self-inflicted wounds or just things we can do better. It sort of doesn't matter. I think we stand to benefit big time by questioning some of the biggest practices we've had up till this date. And I'll tell you, one of the worst ones is what I call user-centered performance. This is one of the worst sins, I would say, of our industry of the last 10 or 15 years, not just for research, but for UX overall. So user-centered performance is UX practice that is primarily about signaling we care rather than actually learning or making a different decision, right? We may not always be aware of it, but I would argue we are all guilty of it in certain ways. So are the people around us who ask us for a lot of work, which qualifies in my mind as user-centered performance. Right? We do work that is user-centered, that is full of empathy and customer-centric because we're supposed to. Because it's how user-centered design is done, right? That's why we should do it. And I think it's become this sort of dogma over the last 15 years. Like, our empathy is what defines us, our ability to represent for the voices of customers and users. That's why we're in the room, right? If those of you who are out there thinking, I don't do this, I've never been a part of this, like, I don't know you, but I think you're full of shit. I think you're probably doing this more often than you think. And here are 4 key examples that I think qualify as user-centered performance. The first, I would say, is crusading. Like, have you ever thought of yourself as a white knight? You know, like, because the people on your team just don't understand. And have you ever had those conversations at lunch with your colleague? Because if you're doing that, you're probably doing user-centered performance. Have you ever prioritized the process, right? This is how we do research. How could we possibly design this thing without doing this research, even though the team knows exactly what they should design? Have you ever done a check-the-box style study or been asked to do one? You know, just to check our assumptions, right? Validation studies. And have you ever set up listening sessions for executives, right? These are all horrible examples of user-centered performance, but there's one that I would say is worse than all of them, which is how might we, right? I think this is the dogma that was delivered to us by design thinking. And if you've ever delivered the study results as a set of how might we's, you have engaged in user-centered performance, and it's the worst, right? It is a complete failure of a researcher's responsibility, right? I'm gonna do all this work to understand a thing, and then I'm not gonna tell you what to do. I'm just gonna provoke you with questions designed to help you be more empathetic and user-centered. What the hell is that? That is going to put us in a service discipline role as long as we focus on outcomes that way. Oh my God, we're good at empathy, right? So that's our role. So obviously I'm making jokes. I'm trying to provoke you at the start of a day of much more useful talks than this. But I think this moment of evolution might be like, hey, we sat back for a while into our user-centered practice, and there are different things that we can do now, right? We became too comfortable with the idea that our first job was empathy and user understanding, when in fact our real job should be matchmakers, right? Finding that beautiful overlap between what users want and the business needs. Basically, Colette gave half my talk in the 90 seconds she introduced the day. So I think that this is true. And why are we not here? Honestly, I think it's partly because of the dogmas we've had in our field for so long. Right? We were just focused on the wrong things. We didn't do the right work, and we painted ourselves into a corner a little bit. I am not advocating for abandoning a user-centered approach. I think that is always going to be a core of what we can do, but I just think we went too all in on it. And so at this point in the talk, you may be reasonably going, sweet, what should we do instead, Judd? And if you're thinking that, here are 3 things I think we should do instead. Again, Colette kind of stole my thunder. Thanks a lot. We should put business value first. We should expand our toolkits. And we need to build better relationships with our research skills. So I'm going to breeze through each one of these things, and then I guess we'll have some time for questions after. So first and foremost, this is an argument a lot of people are making now, right? That we as a field need to be more business-centered. I wrote an article over the summer that used the R word, and one of the biggest responses that I got from that was a lot of people who were very anti-capitalist. They thought it is fundamentally not our job to serve the capitalist overlords that pay our salaries. Now, I'm being facetious in saying it that way, but I'm like, who do you think pays your salary? What are you doing in your job if not helping to make businesses successful? I realize not everybody loves that that's true, but we can also vote with our feet and choose the less extractive forms of capitalism. Being somebody who focuses on the business gets you in the room as a decision maker. It allows you not just influence, but decision-making authority that helps you represent for users. So we have to put it on par, maybe even ahead of what users need. But to do that, we have to restructure our field, right? So this is a list of that came out from Lenny Rachitsky's newsletter of the first 10 employees that 20 or so startups hired, right? So I don't know, do that math. It's like a couple hundred people. And how many of them are researchers? None. None of it. Now, look, maybe it's idiosyncratic. There are plenty of companies out there that hire researchers early on, and that can be hugely valuable. I also think the average startup founder is going to be like, dude, you don't understand. Like, I just got some money. I have a product vision. My funders need me to build it. I need people who are going to help me execute. All good and well until you have to pivot, which is like somewhere between 45 minutes and 10 days away, right? And so if we want to be people who are in this list, we have to put business value first, right? We can't just like think of ourselves. We have to change the perception of what the field is, right? We can't just sit around being sad and pointing fingers and saying that capitalism is bankrupt, right? And so here's what I think we should do to become more business-centered, just to be concrete about it, right? The first thing that we all need to do is support each other in learning the language. Because if you've ever tried to read a quarterly report and thought you were reading like ancient Greek, you're not alone. There's a lot of language, a lot of knowledge we have to get, which is about things that allow us to read the P&L, right? We have to understand, do you all know what a P&L is? It's a profit and loss statement. It's the core way that businesses account for how money comes and goes, right? Read the quarterly report, listen to the shareholder calls, seek every document that you can get your hands on to become fluent in this language. Find out how your company makes money. And I don't just mean like if you work at Airbnb, you're like, we make money by renting places, right? Like, where does the money come from? How does it flow? What is the cost of that, of all of the things we do to make money, right? And then how does it line up to things like goals, metrics, roadmaps? So that is fundamental knowledge we have to have in order to do this pivot that gets us into the matchmaking zone. But to do that well, we then have to put it to action. And there are two things that we should do. The first thing you can do with that knowledge is frame the value of insights differently, right? Now, you can be using business first logic to make arguments in service of users. You're not just saying, isn't this an interesting insight? You're saying, here is exactly where in the conversion funnel. This is why we have an efficiency problem in this part of our product. Our conversion among this constituency is low. And I learned that by interacting with the data and looking at the quarterly report. And now the studies I've done address this specifically. That is a powerful argument to make. And once you do that, you choose different projects, right? When people come to you and ask for that work, that doesn't matter, it isn't pointed enough at a business problem, you make it pointed enough. You say no to that work. And if you're thinking, I don't really get to say no to what I get asked to do, try doing this conversation a couple different times and get back to me and let me know if you get more say about what you can and can't do. Second point, and I'm not going to belabor this one because I think we're all kind of on the same page, but I think that the last 15 years of UXR as a field has been dominated by the idea that it is primarily a qualitative discipline. And I have a strong opinion that that version of UXR is probably going to hold us back in the next 15 years. And there's a lot of talk about being multi-method. But I think we actually have to act differently and build our toolkits in different ways. There are two reasons that I think the purely or mostly qual version of UXR is a thing of the past. The first one is that we mostly work at companies that are awash with data. If you can't interact with it directly, then you are at the service of somebody else, right? We work at a global scale, right? We work with users across the globe. And if you can't scale insights through other means, you're going to be left behind. The second thing is we need to break the stereotype that UXR is a discipline full of people who like to tell stories only or listen to stories only. We know that research, good qual research, is much more than that, but becoming multi-method is going to help us become more influential and in the decision-making room. So I think there are 5.5 tools we all need. It used to be 5, I added a half, I'll tell you why. So the first tool, and this should be a familiar list to you, we just need to take action on it. So formative qual, all the stuff we do that is strategic in nature, that is really trying to understand the problem space, going out into the world and experiencing the more ethnographic style work we do. Evaluative qual, usability. There are a lot of us, and I would argue many of you, who think that work is beneath you. Right? That usability is something for interns and new grads, but not for me because I have ascended into the strategic realm. And I think that's bullshit. I think usability is a difficult and important practice we have neglected as a field. I've seen it drive business value, and it is a clear, if you're wondering about metrics for impact, boom, do more usability work. It is really easy to draw that direct line. We cannot interact with global audiences. There are questions we cannot answer with qualitative methods alone. Survey design and sampling is the third key skill, either because we did qual first, maybe, and it allows us to check the generalizability of some of our assumptions, or maybe we did a survey first and it revealed some interesting dynamics that we don't understand anything about, so we have to get all those beautiful hows and whys by doing qual work. Basic applied statistics, because if you're doing surveys, but you can't even do basic statistics, what are you even doing? Like clicking buttons is not gonna do it for you, no matter what Qualtrics tells you, okay? So you need that fundamental skill. And then this is where the 5.5 comes in. I used to say I thought every researcher needed to be able to write SQL. Nowadays, so much of that is dashboarded and streamlined. I don't know if that's as true anymore, but you still need to be able to interact fluently with the data systems in your company. And now for the half, you need to be able to interact with AI tools. I don't think they're coming for your jobs, but they are going to make you more efficient if you learn prompt engineering, if you learn the different things that AI can do for research practice. That's a totally different talk, though, so let's not do that now. Instead, let's talk about the last and maybe most important thing we can do as researchers to evolve our practice, and it's to build better relationships. So what I'm talking about is turning all those beautiful research skills that you have inward. Focus on colleagues as your research subject, as the participants in your research. Use all those skills to become more influential, to understand your problem space, to develop your leadership, to get in the room, to be the one making decisions. I don't like to use the language of influence because so many researchers talk about our job as to influence decisions. Colette kind of said this too. Yes, be influential, but also be the one in the decision-making seat. I don't know, should I make fun? No, I'm not gonna call her out. But the point is, there's somebody here in the room who I used to give them the same advice all the time, which was, you know you are successful when they cannot have that meeting without you. The cross-functional group is trying to get together to decide on whatever product, design, roadmap decision, and they can't have it if you're not there. That's how you know you've succeeded. And to do that, let's turn our research skills inward. This is another one of those books. This is one that's really important, not just trying to make me sound smart. I don't know if I succeeded in any of that, but this is inspired by a 1989 book that's really important. It's called Influence Without Authority by Alan Cohen and David Bradford. And I recommend you all read it. But again, I'm gonna tell you what it says. So if you skip it, at least you'll have the dilettante's understanding, right? It says basically, echoing like 50 years of good social psychology before them. My PhD's in social psych, so of course I'm interested in that. But they basically say the key to influence is a mutually beneficial exchange of currency, right? So currency is just a shorthand for stuff people want, all the things that they want. And building more influence is all about figuring out what your colleagues want first and then matching what you want to what they want, not the other way around. There, now you don't have to read the book. So Cohen and Bradford say there are 5 types of currency, 5 classes of currency: inspiration, task, position, relationship, and personal. And basically, what they're saying is to be really influential, what we have to do is understand our colleagues deeply, their perspectives, their wants, their needs. We have to bring that empathy, right? We really have to understand our colleagues. Does any of that sound familiar? Like, that is exactly what we are best equipped to do as UX researchers. We just usually think our only job is to focus on users and customers, rather than focusing on our colleagues, which is the thing we can use most to help ourselves be in a better position and help our field evolve, right? That is fundamentally a research project. Arguably, it's like the research project. I would say I've talked to a lot of researchers who think that sounds dirty, right? Wait a second, Judd, you're saying spend time on things like reading quarterly reports and studying our colleagues instead of studying users. Like, when am I gonna have time for research? And I'm like, listen, fair enough, but if a tree falls in the forest and no one was there to hear it, right? And this is how you get it heard. You get it heard by speaking the language of the business with your multi-method tool set, and then using all of that tool set to understand your colleagues, what they want and need really, really deeply, right? And so we can ask questions which align to the different types of currency which Cohen and Bradford are pointing out, right? What do good and right outcomes look like? What information can we both benefit from? How can we use this project to grow both of our networks and reputations? How can I make everybody feel supported and included in this work, including the CEO if you have to? What will impart a sense of ownership and challenge that satisfies that personal currency? We're really good at that kind of thing as UX overall, right? Researchers are beautiful skills for listening, observing, uncovering things. If you're also a designer, illustrating and making things real, because making a thing concrete in the context of a decision, like creating a structure, a visual structure for decision making, these are powerful tools that if you have design skills you can use. If you're a writer, oh my God, the power that goes to the framer of the conversation, the person who gives us the vocabulary. But as researchers specifically, that language is framing is something we are used to focusing on, right? When you really listen and understand language and read between the lines, and then repeat that language back to your stakeholders in really smart ways with the right framing, right? When you can understand by thinking of them as research participants, what their goals are, both the stated ones and the unstated ones. So I always remember this case of an obstinate engineering manager who never seemed to want to participate in the design process at all, was constantly fighting with the research. And it turned out the big problem was their team had spent several months to the point of that year spinning and getting shut down, and they hadn't shipped anything. And the end of the quarter was coming up. And he was worried that if his team didn't ship something by the end of the quarter, that they were going to be in trouble. And so he just wanted to barrel forward. We only found that out when the researcher in question went in there and had that conversation. Obviously not so directly, but you don't do that in research anyway. So that's what good research looks like, to uncover goals, right? What I like to call itches and scratches, right? And that's because one of the most important ways to gain influence is to scratch somebody's itch. You want them to think you're on their side, right? Find out what they're worried about, find out what's bothering them, and then be somebody who helps solve it with all of your beautiful leadership and research skills. And last but not least, think about the power dynamics that will make you better at your job. I always say, so a lot of the time when I'm talking to leaders about this, I say, we talk about the details of the last meeting they were in. I said, hey, we were in a meeting with a cross-functional colleague, you were in a meeting with your boss, but the most beautiful meeting is when you're with a colleague and their boss. Because what you can see in that, I ask questions like, hey, how did they interact with each other? How did they talk to each other? What did it seem like the relationship was? Was one of them kind of stepping on the other? Did they argue a lot? Were they contentious? These are things you need to know, because understanding where your colleagues fit in the spectrum of your other colleagues is going to help you be more influential with all of your insights work. You may think this is cynical, right? But I don't think it is. I don't think it's manipulation. I think it's relationships and alignment. This is how researchers become decision makers, not just influencers. I got to be a GM. I got to be head of the design studio, not primarily because I was a researcher, but because I was a leader who applied these research skills with my colleagues to be more effective as a leader. I think the line between manipulation and influence is about intent. Right? It's all about whether you use these powers for good or for evil. So use them for good if you would, because I think this is just what we're doing. I mean, I have no idea. It's funny to be like, this is the future. I don't fucking know. Who knows what we're doing? None of us know what we're talking about right now, except I feel like the writing is on the wall, right? This is a moment for change. There is an evolution which could benefit us all, but it might help if we sort of thought maybe we should question some of the dogmas of the last 15 years, because doing that and then doing different work on a day-to-day basis is really going to help us as we take on the next challenges for the field. I really feel like the future is bright. It'll be brighter still if we can all make some of these pivots. All right, well, thank you for listening to that.